I'm Michelle Sterling for Friends of Science Society. In April 2023, the Bank of Canada released its first annual climate risk report. Why is the bank fussing with climate change and not sticking to its knitting, you say? Well, it's because this is where all the cool kids hang out. If Greta can be a climate astrologer, why not Bank Governor Tiff Macklem too? And indeed, actual astrology is probably more accurate than what the bank is coming up with, because in astounding testimony to the United States Senate Committee on Budget, Professor Jessica Winkle reports that the climate scenarios used by the banking, finance, and insurance sectors are fraught with conflicts of interest. Listen to this. She testified, currently there's widespread use of implausible emission scenarios to estimate the economic risks of climate change. These scenarios are anchored into use by a dynamic system of conflicts of interest between climate change scientists and the financial industry. Policymakers need plausible estimates of risk to inform the development of feasible action for coastal resilience. So she's talking about these scenarios known as RCP 8.5 and 6.0, with the RCP referring to the representative concentration pathways, mostly related to the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere and its assumed warming effect. However, these are implausible scenarios. Professor Winkle goes on. More recently, the inclusion of climate change risk in investment decisions has expanded conflict of interest among climate change researchers and some of the powerful financial entities and investors. Political leaders and advocacy organizations are also in the mix. A $40 billion industry of climate analytics enlists academic researchers as consultants. And here are just 3 examples. Central bank stress testing scenarios are developed by researchers who are also lead authors on IPCC reports and have important roles in organizing the international modeling community in the development of IPCC scenarios. Funding for central bank scenario development and the most recent meeting of the scenario modeling community comes from influential organizations including Bloomberg Philanthropies, ClimateWorks, and the Bezos Earth Fund. McKinsey & Company used a climate consultancy to produce a series of widely influential reports on climate change financial risks. In defense of their use of RCP 8.5, the report cited a peer-reviewed publication written by its own consultants. The researchers did not declare their conflicts of interest as consultants for McKinsey or their association with the asset management firm Wellington. Shortly after publication of the article, one of its authors landed a political position, while the author's home institution announced coordinated efforts with Wellington to influence the Securities and Exchange Commission regulatory decisions. The Risky Business Project, an academic industry research collaboration, was organized by 3 wealthy politicians with a goal to make the climate threat feel real. Research products are important components to national climate and sea level rise assessments and a policy advocacy tool used to evaluate real estate flood risk. Core members of the research collaboration move seamlessly between private consulting, policy science advisory positions, and academic researcher. So, Bank of Canada claims that climate change poses enormous risks to Canada and the world only because they're using wildly exaggerated, implausible scenarios upon which to base their calculations. And now we have sent several letters to the Bank of Canada and posted them as open letters to alert them to this problem. Yet they have not reassessed their sloppy, conflict of interest, fraught work. Likewise, the Bank of Canada begins by telling us in their report that natural disasters like floods and wildfires are related to climate change, when this is not founded in evidence. It's only founded in climate hysteria, headline happy media. The second thing Bank of Canada tells us is that there's a risk to Canada's oil and gas industry in a time of transition to clean energy. They've obviously done no homework on this matter. Oil, gas, and coal are booming in demand in developing nations. In fact, China plans to be the world's factory for all forms of high-tech by 2025. That's in 2 years. How do you think you mine critical minerals for high-tech and clean-tech, Bank of Canada? With fossil fuels. Lots of them. Oh, and by the way, there's no possible material supply chain to meet the demands of net zero goals, not the 2030 and not the 2050, by which time China has targeted itself to be the globally dominant power. Well, this was not mentioned in the Bank of Canada's climate risk report, which is odd since China emits in 1 month what Canada emits in a year and a half. Bank of Canada says it doesn't set climate policy, but to fulfill the bank's mandates to control inflation and promote financial stability, we need to understand the implications of climate change for the Canadian economy and financial system. Well, maybe you need to understand where emissions are coming from in the world and to make a realistic assessment of unattainable energy transition targets with unavailable materials supply chain. Surely with your flock of climate risk analysts, you could have had 1 or 2 of them read Simon Michaud's detailed report done for the Geological Survey of Finland and Professor Jessica Winkle's testimony to the U.S. Senate on the conflicts of interest that you are apparently oblivious to. And it would be nice if the Bank of Canada would stop greenwashing the Canadian public by claiming to have gone 100% renewable in your operations by buying carbon credits from Bullfrog Power. Catherine McKenna, head of the UN High-Level Expert Group, will have you punished for this lack of integrity. She and her team demand absolute reduction of GHGs. No fake carbon credit purchases allowed. So I guess that means you'll have to shut down all your fancy computers that your climate risk people work with and go back to figuring out the future the old way, with an abacus, pencil and paper, and a crystal ball. Please issue a statement with the value of the carbon credits you're buying from Bullfrog Power. Canadians who are lined up at food banks, suffering heat or eat poverty from the idiotic carbon tax and climate policies being imposed upon us, need to know how much Bullfrog is profiting by sales of the lack of delivery of an invisible substance to no one, sold to the Bank of Canada so they can greenwash the tax-paying Canadian public. For Friends of Science Society, I'm Michelle Sterling.